Sarah Mitchell never imagined herself as a soldier. Growing up in a quiet town in Oregon, she spent her childhood climbing trees and hiking with her father through the dense forests near their home. Her mother always worried about her tomboyish nature, but her father encouraged it. He had been in the military himself and saw something special in his daughter's fearless spirit. When Sarah turned 22, she made a decision that shocked her entire family. She enlisted in the Army. Her mother cried for 3 days straight, but Sarah felt something pulling her toward service. It wasn't about patriotism alone, though she loved her country. It was about proving to herself that she could do something meaningful with her life. Basic training nearly broke her. The physical demands were one thing, but the mental pressure was something else entirely. Drill sergeants screamed in her face, questioning whether a woman belonged in combat roles. Sarah gritted her teeth and pushed through every obstacle course, every midnight march, every grueling exercise. She refused to quit, even when her muscles screamed and her mind begged for rest. After completing her training, Sarah was assigned to a forward operating base in Afghanistan. The landscape was harsh and unforgiving, nothing like the green forests of Oregon. Dust covered everything, and the heat was suffocating during the day while nights brought bone-chilling cold. The base sat in a valley surrounded by ridges and mountains, where enemy fighters could hide and observe their every movement. Sarah's unit consisted of 12 soldiers, and she was the only woman among them. At first, some of the men questioned her presence. They made jokes and tested her in small ways, wondering if she could handle the pressure of real combat. Sarah didn't argue or complain. She simply did her job better than expected, proving herself through actions rather than words. Her commanding officer, Lieutenant Marcus Reynolds, was a fair man who judged soldiers by their performance, not their gender. He saw potential in Sarah and began assigning her to more challenging tasks. She excelled at marksmanship, showing a natural ability to calculate distance, wind, and trajectory. Her shots were consistently accurate, even under pressure. During training exercises at the base, Sarah discovered she had exceptional vision and steady hands. The range instructor noticed her talent immediately and recommended her for sniper training. Sarah felt both excited and terrified by the suggestion. Being a sniper meant taking on one of the most demanding roles in the military, requiring patience, precision, and the ability to make life-or-death decisions in split seconds. She threw herself into the additional training with determination. Hours were spent studying ballistics, learning to read environmental conditions, and practicing breathing techniques. The mental aspect was just as important as the physical skills. A sniper had to remain calm under extreme stress, sometimes lying motionless in uncomfortable positions for hours while waiting for the right moment. Sarah's first real assignment as a designated marksman came during a routine patrol mission. The unit was tasked with checking on a remote village where intelligence suggested Taliban fighters might be recruiting or hiding. It should have been a straightforward mission, but nothing in Afghanistan was ever truly routine. The night before the patrol, Sarah cleaned and rechecked her rifle for the 3rd time. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, but her mind raced with thoughts about what might happen the next day. She had trained for combat, but training and reality were two very different things. Would she freeze when it mattered? Would she be able to pull the trigger if a human being appeared in her scope? Her bunkmate, Corporal James Chen, noticed her nervousness. He had been deployed twice before and understood the anxiety that came before a mission. He sat down across from her and shared stories about his own first patrol, admitting that he had been so nervous he almost threw up in his helmet. His honesty helped ease Sarah's tension slightly. Sleep came in brief, restless intervals that night. Sarah dreamed of home, of hiking through Oregon forests with her father, of her mother's worried face. She woke before dawn, her heart pounding, knowing that the day ahead would test everything she had learned and challenge her in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The mission was supposed to be simple, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to happen. The sun was just beginning to rise when the patrol prepared to move out. Sarah checked her gear one final time, making sure everything was secure and accessible. Her rifle felt heavy across her chest, a constant reminder of the responsibility she carried. Lieutenant Reynolds gathered the squad for a final briefing, his voice calm and professional as he outlined the route and objectives. The plan seemed straightforward enough. They would travel to a village about 15 kilometers from the base, speak with local leaders, gather intelligence, and return before nightfall. Sarah was assigned as backup support, which meant she would position herself on a ridge overlooking the village while the main patrol entered and conducted their business. It wasn't the most exciting role, but it was important. She would serve as extra eyes, watching for any threats that the patrol might not see from ground level. The convoy rolled out just after dawn. 3 armored vehicles carried the squad across rough terrain, bouncing and jolting over rocks and dried riverbeds. Sarah sat in the second vehicle, watching the landscape pass by through the small bulletproof window. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still touched by morning shadows. Everything looked peaceful, almost beautiful, but she knew danger could hide behind any rock or hill. After nearly 2 hours of driving, the convoy stopped at a predetermined location, about 2 kilometers from the target village. This was where Sarah would separate from the main group. Lieutenant Reynolds called her over and pointed to a ridge that overlooked the valley where the village sat. "That's your position, Mitchell," he said, handing her a radio. "Get up there, find good cover, and keep your eyes on us. If you see anything suspicious, anything at all, you report it immediately." "Understood?" Sarah nodded, securing the radio to her vest. "Yes, sir. I've got your back." "I know you do," Reynolds said with a slight smile. "Stay sharp up there." Specialist David Park was assigned to accompany Sarah to the ridge. He was a communications expert and would help relay information if needed. The 2 of them grabbed their gear and began the climb while the rest of the patrol waited at the vehicles, giving them time to get into position. The climb was steep and exhausting. Sarah's legs burned as she navigated loose rocks and sharp inclines. The sun climbed higher, and sweat soaked through her uniform. She focused on her breathing and her footing, knowing that one wrong step could send her tumbling down the slope. David followed close behind, his heavier communications equipment making the climb even more challenging for him. It took them 40 minutes to reach a suitable position on the ridge. Sarah found a spot behind a cluster of large rocks that provided both cover and a clear view of the valley below. She could see the village clearly now, a collection of mud brick buildings clustered around a central area. Smoke rose from cooking fires and she could make out tiny figures moving through the streets. David set up his equipment, while Sarah unpacked her rifle and positioned herself comfortably behind the rocks. She extended the bipod legs and settled the weapon against her shoulder, looking through the scope to scan the area. The magnification brought everything into sharp focus. She could see individual people now. Women carrying water jugs, children playing, men gathered in groups talking. "Patrol, this is Overwatch," Sarah spoke into her radio, using the call sign assigned to her position. "We're in position on the ridge. I have clear visibility of the village and surrounding area." Reynolds' voice crackled back through the radio. "Copy that, Overwatch. We're moving in now. Keep us informed." Sarah watched as the 3 armored vehicles resumed their journey toward the village. They moved slowly, cautiously, kicking up small clouds of dust. She tracked their progress through her scope, her finger resting beside the trigger guard, ready but not tense. The vehicles entered the village without incident. Sarah watched as the soldiers dismounted and began speaking with villagers who had gathered to meet them. Everything seemed calm. Children approached the soldiers curiously, and some of the men accepted cigarettes offered by the Americans. It looked like a successful interaction, exactly what they had hoped for. "So far, so good," David said from his position beside her. He was monitoring multiple radio channels, listening for any chatter or warnings from command. Sarah continued scanning the area beyond the village. Her training had taught her to never focus solely on the obvious target. Threats often came from unexpected directions. She moved her scope slowly across the ridgeline opposite their position, studying every shadow and formation. Something caught her attention, a glint of light barely visible, coming from a rocky outcrop about 800 meters away. It could have been nothing, just sunlight reflecting off a piece of metal or glass. But Sarah's instincts prickled. She focused her scope on that area, studying it carefully. There. Movement. Someone was there, partially hidden behind rocks. Sarah's heart rate increased as she tried to determine if this was a threat. The person could be a villager, a shepherd, anyone. But the position was suspicious. Why would someone be up on that ridge watching the village unless they had a specific reason? "David," she whispered urgently. "I've got possible movement on the opposite ridge, maybe 800 meters out. Can't confirm if it's hostile yet." David immediately relayed the information over the radio. Sarah kept her scope trained on the position, her breathing slow and controlled. Seconds felt like minutes as she waited for more information or clearer confirmation of what she was seeing. Then she saw it clearly, the unmistakable shape of a rifle barrel extending from behind the rocks. Someone was taking aim at the patrol below. Sarah's training took over instantly. Her mind became crystal clear, focused entirely on the threat developing before her eyes. Through her scope, she could now see the figure more clearly. A man wearing traditional Afghan clothing had positioned himself behind rocks with a rifle pointed toward the village where her patrol was conducting their meeting. "Overwatch to patrol, I have confirmed hostile on the opposite ridge," Sarah said into her radio, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Single shooter, 800 meters from my position, rifle aimed at your location." Reynolds' voice came back immediately, tense but controlled. "Copy that, Overwatch. Can you neutralize?" 800 meters. It was a long shot, even for a trained marksman. Sarah had made shots at that distance during training, but this was different. This was a real human being in her crosshairs. One squeeze of the trigger would end someone's life. But if she didn't take the shot, that person would likely kill one or more of her fellow soldiers below. "I have a shot," Sarah confirmed, adjusting her position slightly, waiting for clear confirmation of hostile intent. She didn't have to wait long. Through her scope, she saw the hostile fighter adjust his position, clearly preparing to fire. His rifle was definitely aimed at the patrol below. There was no question now about his intentions, but something made Sarah hesitate for just a second. She noticed movement near the hostile fighter. Another figure emerged from behind the rocks, smaller than the first. A child, maybe 12 or 13 years old, carrying what looked like ammunition. The boy handed something to the man with the rifle, then crouched beside him. Sarah's breath caught. The presence of the child complicated everything. She couldn't risk hitting the boy. The man and child were close together, and at this distance, even the slightest error could be catastrophic. She adjusted her aim, calculating wind speed and drop, waiting for the right moment when she could be absolutely certain of her shot. "Overwatch, what's your status?" Reynolds' voice had an edge of urgency now. "Stand by," Sarah responded. "Complications on target." David glanced at her, understanding the weight of the moment. He had been in similar situations before and knew she was facing an impossible decision. Through his binoculars, he could see what Sarah was seeing through her scope. In the village, below, the patrol was still engaged in conversation with local leaders, completely unaware of the immediate danger they faced. The hostile fighter completed his preparations and settled into firing position. Sarah could see his finger moving toward the trigger. Time was running out. The boy moved. He shifted position slightly, creating separation between himself and the man with the rifle. It was the opening Sarah needed. She took a slow breath, let half of it out, and held. Her finger moved to the trigger. The world narrowed to just what she could see through her scope. The crosshairs settled on the hostile fighter's center mass. Everything she had learned, every hour of training, every practice shot came down to this single moment. Sarah's heart beat steadily in her chest. Her hands were rock solid. The wind was light, blowing slightly from left to right. She made a tiny adjustment to compensate. "Overwatch taking the shot," she said calmly into the radio. The rifle kicked against her shoulder with familiar force. The sound echoed across the valley. Through her scope, Sarah watched the bullet travel across the distance in what seemed like slow motion, but was actually less than a second. The hostile fighter jerked backward and collapsed, his rifle falling from his hands. The boy screamed and dropped beside the fallen man. Sarah felt a stab of guilt, knowing that child would carry this memory forever, but she pushed the emotion aside. She had to confirm the threat was eliminated and watch for additional hostiles who might respond to the shot. "Target down," she reported, her voice still steady, though her hands had begun to shake slightly now that the immediate crisis was over. Scanning for additional threats. Below in the village, the patrol had scattered to defensive positions the moment they heard the shot. Reynolds was shouting orders, getting his people to cover while trying to assess the situation. The villagers had also scattered, running for their homes in fear and confusion. Sarah swept her scope across the entire area, looking for any other threats. The boy on the opposite ridge had dragged himself behind cover, but she could see he wasn't armed and posed no danger. She continued scanning, her professional training, overriding the emotional turmoil beginning to build inside her. No additional threats visible, she reported after a thorough scan. Area appears clear except for one juvenile non-combatant at the hostile position. Copy that, Reynolds responded. Maintain overwatch. We're securing the village and preparing to investigate the hostile position. The next 20 minutes felt like hours. Sarah maintained her position, continuing to scan for threats while the patrol secured the area and questioned villagers about possible additional insurgents. David worked the radio, coordinating with command back at the base and providing situation updates. Finally, Reynolds sent a small team to investigate the position where Sarah had eliminated the hostile fighter. She watched through her scope as they climbed the opposite ridge and approached the location carefully. When they reached the spot, one soldier knelt beside the body while others secured the area. "Overwatch, this is ground team," came a voice over the radio. "Your target was armed with an SVD sniper rifle and had clear line of sight on our position. We found multiple magazines and what appears to be a targeting list. You definitely saved lives today, Mitchell." Sarah felt a complex mixture of emotions wash over her. Relief that she had protected her fellow soldiers, guilt over taking a life, sadness for the boy who had witnessed it, pride in her ability to perform under pressure. It all hit her at once, but she forced herself to remain focused on her job. The patrol completed their mission and began the journey back to base, but the reality of what had just happened was only beginning to sink in for Sarah. The ride back to base was quiet. Sarah sat in the armored vehicle, her rifle across her lap, staring at nothing in particular. The other soldiers gave her space, understanding that she was processing what had happened. David sat beside her, occasionally glancing over but not saying anything. Sometimes silence was more supportive than words. When they arrived at the base, Lieutenant Reynolds pulled Sarah aside before she could head to her quarters. His expression was serious but not unkind. He had been in combat long enough to recognize the signs of someone coming to terms with their first kill. "You did good work out there, Mitchell," he said, his hand resting briefly on her shoulder. "That shooter would have killed someone, maybe multiple people. You saved lives today. Remember that." Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice to respond. She wanted to believe his words, needed to believe them, but the image of the boy's face kept flashing through her mind. Reynolds seemed to understand her internal struggle. "Go get some rest," he continued. "We'll debrief properly tomorrow. But right now you need to process this. Talk to someone if you need to. Don't bottle it up." She made her way to her bunk in a daze. The small room she shared with two other female soldiers felt both too empty and too confining. Her bunkmates were out on different assignments, which Sarah was grateful for. She needed time alone with her thoughts. She sat on her bed and began the ritual of cleaning her rifle, her hands moving through the familiar motions automatically. The repetitive task was soothing, giving her something concrete to focus on. As she worked, her mind replayed the events of the day over and over. Had she done the right thing? The question plagued her even though she knew the answer logically. The hostile fighter had been seconds away from shooting at her patrol. He had a sniper rifle, ammunition, and clear intent to kill. She had neutralized a legitimate threat and saved American lives. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally were two different things. That night, sleep refused to come. Every time Sarah closed her eyes, she saw the moment of impact through her scope. She saw the boy's terrified face. She wondered about the man she had killed. Did he have a family? What had driven him to take up arms? Had he been a hardened Taliban fighter or just a villager, convinced that foreigners were the enemy? These questions had no good answers, Sarah knew. War was complicated and messy, full of impossible choices and moral gray areas. She had signed up knowing this, but experiencing it firsthand was something entirely different. Around 3 a.m, she gave up on sleep and went to find the base chaplain. Chaplain Williams was a kind man in his 50s who had deployed multiple times and counseled countless soldiers through similar struggles. His office light was on and he welcomed Sarah without judgment or surprise. "Can't sleep?" he asked gently, gesturing to a chair. Sarah sat down and found herself pouring out everything she was feeling. The fear during the shot, the relief when it connected, the guilt about the boy, the confusion about whether she had done the right thing. Williams listened patiently, not interrupting, letting her process verbally. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment before speaking. What you're feeling is normal, Sarah. It means you're human. The day killing someone becomes easy is the day you should worry. The fact that you're struggling with this shows you have a conscience and you care about life, even the life of an enemy. But I took someone's life, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. You did, Williams acknowledged, and that's something you'll carry with you always. But you also saved lives. Your fellow soldiers went home that night because of your actions. The question isn't whether taking a life is good or bad in absolute terms. The question is whether in that specific moment, with the information you had and the circumstances you faced, you made the right choice. Sarah considered his words carefully. I think I did. I know I did. But it still feels terrible. That's because you're a good person, William said with a sad smile. Bad people don't struggle with these decisions. They don't lose sleep over taking a life. The fact that you're here, talking about this, processing your feelings, that tells me you're exactly the kind of soldier we need. Someone who takes the responsibility seriously. They talked for another hour, and gradually Sarah began to feel a small measure of peace. The guilt and confusion didn't disappear entirely, but they became more manageable. She understood that this was something she would have to work through over time, not something that would be resolved in a single conversation. The next morning, the formal debrief took place. Sarah sat in a room with Lieutenant Reynolds, the company commander, and several other officers. They went through the entire mission step by step, examining her decisions and actions. The tone was analytical rather than accusatory. They wanted to understand what happened and learn from it. Sarah explained her observations, her decision-making process, and her execution of the shot. The officers asked questions, took notes, and occasionally consulted with each other. Throughout the entire debrief, Sarah remained professional and detailed, setting aside her emotional response to focus on the tactical and operational aspects. At the end of the session, the company commander stood and addressed Sarah directly. Specialist Mitchell, your actions yesterday exemplify the highest standards of military service. You identified a threat, reported it properly, waited for confirmation, and neutralized it with precision. Your vigilance and skill prevented casualties among your unit. Well done. The formal praise felt strange to Sarah. She had done her job, yes, but it didn't feel like something worthy of special recognition. Still, she accepted the commendation with appropriate military bearing, standing straight and acknowledging the commander's words. Word of the incident spread quickly through the base. Other soldiers looked at Sarah differently now. Some with respect, others with curiosity, a few with something that looked like caution. She had crossed a threshold that separated those who had seen combat from those who hadn't. Life on the base continued, but everything felt different to Sarah. She went through her daily routines with mechanical precision, but a part of her remained distant, observing rather than fully engaging. The other soldiers in her unit tried to connect with her in different ways. Some offered congratulations, treating her shot as a victory. Others simply nodded in understanding, recognizing what she was going through without needing to verbalize it. Corporal James Chen, her bunkmate who had tried to comfort her before the mission, made a point of checking in regularly. He didn't push Sarah to talk, but his presence was steady and reassuring. During meals, he would sit nearby and share mundane stories about his family back home, or complain about the terrible food in a way that almost made her smile. 3 days after the incident, Sarah received an unexpected message. Intelligence officers wanted to speak with her about what she had observed during the mission. She reported to a secure briefing room where 2 intelligence analysts were waiting with Lieutenant Reynolds. They showed her photographs and documents recovered from the hostile fighter's position. The targeting list mentioned earlier wasn't just a list of names. It was detailed information about patrol patterns, timing, and specific soldiers considered high-value targets. The enemy had been conducting surveillance for weeks, planning a coordinated attack. Your action didn't just save lives that day, one of the analysts explained. It disrupted a larger operation. We've been tracking this cell for months, and this was a significant setback for them. The intelligence we recovered from that position has already led to additional operations. Sarah absorbed this information quietly. It helped, knowing that her actions had broader implications beyond that single moment. But it didn't erase the reality of what she had done or make the weight any lighter. It simply added context, the analyst continued, showing her more details about the hostile fighter. He had been a known Taliban operative with connections to several attacks on coalition forces. He wasn't a random villager or someone caught up in circumstances beyond his control. He was a trained combatant who had chosen this path deliberately. "What about the boy?" Sarah asked, the question that had been haunting her since that day. The analysts exchanged glances. "We're still gathering information about him. Initial reports suggest he was either the fighter's son or nephew, possibly being trained as a future combatant. It's a common practice in some areas, unfortunately. Children are indoctrinated young." Sarah felt a sharp pain in her chest. The boy's involvement wasn't his choice, not really. He had been born into a conflict not of his making, and pushed into a role by circumstances and family pressure. She wondered what would happen to him now, whether he would continue down the same path or if this tragedy might somehow redirect his life. After the intelligence briefing, Sarah found herself thinking more deeply about the complexities of the conflict. It was easy to think in simple terms of good versus evil, right versus wrong, but reality was messy and complicated. People made choices based on limited information, cultural pressures, survival instincts, and beliefs shaped by their experiences. She began spending time with some of the interpreters who worked with the base, asking them about Afghan culture and trying to understand the perspectives of local people. One interpreter, a man named Ahmad who had worked with American forces for years, was particularly helpful. "War is tragedy," Ahmad said during one of their conversations. "Everyone loses something. The man you killed, he made choices that led to that moment. You made choices that led to that moment. And now both of you must live with consequences. Him in death, you in life. Does it get easier?" Sarah asked. Ahmad shook his head slowly. "No, it does not get easier. But you learn to carry it. You learn that you cannot change the past, only how you move forward. You honor those you saved by living well and making good choices in the future." His words resonated with Sarah. She began to realize that she had a choice in how she processed this experience. She could let it destroy her, consume her with guilt and doubt. Or she could acknowledge the weight of it, learn from it, and use it to become a better soldier in person. About a week after the incident, Sarah was approached by Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, the senior non-commissioned officer in her unit. He was a veteran of multiple deployments and had a reputation for being tough but fair. "Mitchell, walk with me," he said, and Sarah fell into step beside him as they walked the perimeter of the base. "I heard what happened on that ridge," Rodriguez began, "and I heard you've been struggling with it. That's good. That's human. But I want to tell you something important." He stopped and turned to face her directly. "You're going to face more situations like this. Maybe not exactly the same, but moments where you have to make hard choices with lives in the balance. Each time will be difficult. Each time will leave a mark, but you can't let it paralyze you." "How do you deal with it, Sergeant?" Sarah asked. Rodriguez looked out across the desert landscape, his eyes distant. "I remember why I'm here. I remember the people counting on me to do my job. And I try to be the kind of person worthy of the responsibility I've been given. I make mistakes, we all do, but I keep trying to do better, to be better." He turned back to Sarah. "You have a gift, Mitchell. Your marksmanship, your calm under pressure, your ability to make the hard call when it matters. Don't waste that gift by second-guessing yourself into inaction. Honor it by using it wisely and continuing to grow as a soldier." His words struck something deep in Sarah. She realized she had been so focused on the negative aspects of what happened that she hadn't fully considered the positive outcome. Her patrol had come home safe. Other missions had been more successful because of the intelligence recovered. Future lives might be saved because of the disruption to enemy operations. That night, Sarah wrote a letter to her father. She didn't tell him the specific details of what happened, but she wrote about the complexities of service, about making difficult decisions, and about trying to live up to the values he had instilled in her. Writing the letter helped her organize her thoughts and feelings in a new way. 2 weeks after the Ridge incident, Sarah's unit received orders for another patrol mission. This time they would be conducting a presence patrol through several villages in a different sector, showing coalition force visibility and gathering intelligence about local conditions. When the assignment roster was posted, Sarah's name was listed as primary overwatch. The night before the mission, Sarah experienced the same nervous energy she had felt before, but this time it was different. She knew what combat felt like now. She understood the weight of the responsibility. But instead of being paralyzed by that knowledge, she felt more prepared. She checked her equipment with careful attention, cleaned her rifle thoroughly, and went through her mental preparation routine. Lieutenant Reynolds noticed the change in her. During the pre-mission briefing, he caught her eye and gave a subtle nod of approval. He had seen many soldiers go through their first combat experience, and he could tell Sarah was processing it in a healthy way. The mission itself went smoothly. Sarah positioned herself on another ridge overlooking the patrol route, maintaining vigilance throughout the operation. She scanned constantly, reporting anything unusual, but no threats materialized. The patrol completed their objectives and returned to base without incident. Over the following months, Sarah participated in dozens of missions. Some were routine and uneventful. Others were tense and dangerous. She learned to trust her instincts, to read the environment, and to communicate effectively with her team. Her reputation as a reliable and skilled marksman grew within the unit. But Sarah also learned something else during those months. She learned that being a good soldier wasn't just about shooting straight or following orders. It was about understanding the bigger picture, about building relationships with fellow soldiers, about making ethical choices in morally complex situations. She began mentoring newer soldiers who arrived at the base, sharing not just tactical knowledge but also the emotional and mental aspects of deployment. When a young private named Marcus Washington joined the unit and was assigned to his first patrol, Sarah took him aside and talked honestly about fear, responsibility, and the importance of processing difficult experiences. "Is it true you made an 800-meter shot to save the patrol?" Marcus asked, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and nervousness about his own upcoming mission. Sarah nodded slowly. "Yes, but that's not the important part of the story. The important part is that I was paying attention. I reported what I saw, I waited for the right moment, and I trusted my training. You don't need to be a hero. You just need to do your job well and take care of your team." Marcus seemed to relax slightly, and Sarah recognized her own anxiety from months earlier reflected in his young face. She remembered how Corporal Chen's honesty had helped her, and she tried to offer the same genuine support. Sarah's relationship with her family back home evolved as well. Her mother still worried constantly, calling the base whenever possible and sending care packages filled with homemade cookies and letters. But there was a new respect in their communications. Her mother could sense that Sarah had changed, had grown into someone capable and strong. Her father wrote less frequently, but with more depth. His letters talked about his own military service, sharing stories he had never told before. He seemed to understand what Sarah was going through in a way that didn't require explicit explanation. In one letter, he wrote simply, "I'm proud of the soldier you've become, but more importantly, I'm proud of the person you remain." Those words meant more to Sarah than any commendation or official recognition. Maintaining her humanity while performing difficult duties, that was the real challenge. Not becoming hardened or cynical, not losing her capacity for empathy and moral consideration. Those were the things that truly mattered. About 4 months after the Ridge incident, Sarah was sitting in the mess hall when she overheard a conversation at a nearby table. A group of soldiers was discussing a recent firefight where several enemy combatants had been killed. They were talking casually, almost jovially about the action. Something about their tone bothered Sarah. There was a disconnect, a lack of appreciation for the gravity of taking human life. She understood dark humor as a coping mechanism, had used it herself at times. But this felt different, like they had forgotten that each enemy combatant was still a person, still someone's son or brother or father. She didn't say anything at the time, but the conversation stayed with her. That evening, she sought out Chaplain Williams again. They had continued meeting occasionally over the months, and Sarah valued his perspective. "How do you stay balanced?" she asked him. "How do you maintain respect for human life while also doing a job that sometimes requires taking it?" Williams considered the question carefully. "It's one of the great moral challenges of military service. I think the key is never letting it become routine or casual. Every life has value, every death matters. The moment we forget that, we lose something essential about ourselves." He paused, then continued, "You can't control how other people process their experiences. Some soldiers use humor or detachment to cope, and that's their way of surviving emotionally. But you can control your own response, your own moral framework. Keep wrestling with these questions, Sarah. Don't stop thinking deeply about the implications of your actions." Sarah took his words to heart. She made a conscious decision about the kind of soldier she wanted to be. Competent and effective, yes, but also thoughtful and ethical. Someone who could do hard things when necessary but never lost sight of the weight of those actions. She started keeping a journal, writing down her thoughts and experiences, not detailed operational information, which would have been a security violation, but personal reflections on what she was learning about herself, about leadership, about moral courage. The journal became a way to process her experiences and track her own growth. As her deployment progressed toward its conclusion, Sarah found herself reflecting on how much she had changed. The nervous young woman who had climbed that ridge months ago felt like a different person. She had been tested in ways she never imagined, and had discovered reserves of strength and character she didn't know she possessed. One afternoon, Lieutenant Reynolds called her into his office. He had news that would change Sarah's trajectory in the military. The Army was expanding opportunities for women in combat roles, and based on her performance, she was being recommended for advanced sniper training when she returned stateside. "You have a natural talent, Mitchell," Reynolds said. "But more than that, you have the right mindset. You take the responsibility seriously. That's what makes a great sniper, not just the ability to shoot straight." Sarah felt a surge of mixed emotions, pride at the recognition, excitement about the opportunity, but also trepidation about what it would mean. More deployments, more situations where she might have to make life or death decisions, more weight to carry. But she also knew this was a chance to develop her skills and serve at a higher level. "I accept, sir," she said without hesitation. Reynolds smiled. "I thought you might. You've earned this, Sarah, and I think you'll do great things." As Sarah left his office, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the forests of Oregon to the ridges of Afghanistan, from uncertainty to competence, from innocence to experience. She had taken a life to save lives, and that paradox would always be part of her story. But she had also discovered something important about herself. She was capable of more than she had ever imagined. Not just physically or tactically, but morally and emotionally. She could face difficult truths, make hard choices, and still maintain her humanity. That was the real achievement, more valuable than any medal or commendation. The sun was setting over the base, painting the Afghan sky in shades of orange and purple. Sarah stood outside her quarters, watching the colors change, and felt a sense of peace settling over her. She wasn't the same person who had arrived months ago, and she never would be again. But she was becoming someone she could be proud of, someone worthy of the trust placed in her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new missions, new opportunities to serve. But tonight, Sarah Mitchell allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. She had been only backup on that ridge, but when it mattered most, she had been exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what needed to be done, and she would carry that knowledge along with all its complexity and weight, forward into whatever came next. The final weeks of Sarah's deployment flew by in a blur of missions, paperwork, and preparations for returning home. The entire unit felt the energy shift as their rotation neared its end. Soldiers talked more about families, plans for leave, and the simple pleasures of home they had been missing. But there was also a strange reluctance, a recognition that leaving meant saying goodbye to bonds forged under extraordinary circumstances. Sarah found herself walking the base perimeter one last time, taking in details she had stopped noticing months ago. The way dust settled on everything by afternoon, the distant mountains that had seemed threatening at first but had become familiar landmarks, the sound of generators humming constantly in the background. These things had become part of her daily reality, and soon they would be memories. Corporal James Chen found her during one of these walks. They had become close friends over the deployment, sharing the unique bond of people who had faced danger together. He carried 2 bottles of near beer, the non-alcoholic beverage allowed on base, and handed her one. "Thinking about home?" he asked, settling onto a concrete barrier beside her. "Yes and no," Sarah admitted. "I'm excited to see my family, to sleep in a real bed, to eat food that doesn't taste like cardboard. But part of me wonders if I'll fit back into that world anymore. I'm not the same person who left." Chen nodded knowingly. "Nobody is. That's the weird part about deployment. You change fundamentally, but everyone back home stayed the same. They can't really understand what you've been through, and you can't fully explain it." "How did you handle it after your first deployment?" Sarah asked, honestly. "Not great," Chen admitted. "I tried to pretend nothing had changed, jumped right back into civilian mode. But it felt fake, like I was acting. Took me a while to realize I needed to integrate both parts of myself. The person I was before and the person I became here, they're both me." Sarah considered his words carefully. She had been wondering how to reconcile the different versions of herself. The girl who climbed trees in Oregon forests seemed very distant from the soldier who had taken a life from 800 meters away. But Chen was right. She didn't have to choose between them. She could be both. The night before they were scheduled to leave, the unit held an informal gathering. No official ceremony, just soldiers sharing stories, expressing gratitude and acknowledging what they had been through together. Lieutenant Reynolds gave a short speech, thanking everyone for their service and professionalism. When he finished, he asked if anyone wanted to say anything. Several soldiers shared funny stories or expressed appreciation for specific people. Then Sergeant Rodriguez spoke up. "I want to recognize Specialist Mitchell," he said, and Sarah felt her face flush as attention turned to her. She came into this deployment as one of the newest members of our unit. She could have been a liability, someone we had to watch out for. Instead, she became someone we could count on absolutely. Her actions on that ridge showed not just skill but character. She saved lives, and she did it with professionalism and moral courage. That's the standard we should all aspire to. The other soldiers clapped, and several came over to shake Sarah's hand or pat her shoulder. She felt overwhelmed by the recognition, but also deeply grateful. These people understood what she had gone through in a way nobody else could. The flight home was long and exhausting. Sarah dozed fitfully, her mind cycling between anticipation about seeing her family and anxiety about readjusting to civilian life. When the plane finally touched down on American soil, a cheer went up from the soldiers. They were home. The reunion with her family was emotional and overwhelming. Her mother cried, her father hugged her tightly without saying anything, and her younger sister wouldn't stop asking questions. Everything felt simultaneously familiar and strange. The house looked smaller than she remembered. Normal sounds like traffic and television seemed too loud after months of desert quiet. Her mother had prepared her favorite meal, but Sarah found she couldn't eat much. Her appetite had changed along with so many other things. She noticed herself scanning exits, sitting with her back to walls, flinching at sudden noises. These were habits formed during deployment, automatic responses that would take time to fade. That first night home, Sarah lay in her childhood bed and stared at the ceiling. It was too quiet, too comfortable, too safe. Part of her missed the simplicity of military life where her role and purpose were clear. Here, she would have to figure out how to be a regular person again while carrying the weight of extraordinary experiences. Over the following days, Sarah attended the mandatory post-deployment briefings and medical screenings. The Army was getting better at recognizing and addressing the psychological impacts of combat. A counselor asked her detailed questions about her experiences, looking for signs of PTSD or other issues that might need treatment. Sarah was honest about her struggles processing the shooting and the ongoing complexity of her feelings about it. The counselor assured her that what she was experiencing was normal and gave her resources for continued support. Sarah appreciated the help but also knew that time and personal reflection would be her primary healing tools. She took a week of leave before reporting for advanced sniper training. During that week, she spent time in the forest with her father, hiking the trails she had loved as a child. They didn't talk much about Afghanistan. Her father seemed to understand that she would share details when and if she was ready. Instead, they walked together in comfortable silence, finding peace in the familiar landscape. One afternoon, sitting on a ridge overlooking a valley not unlike the one in Afghanistan, her father finally spoke about her deployment. "Your mother told me about the commendation you received," he said quietly. "I know what it means when a soldier saves their unit. I know the weight that comes with it too." Sarah looked at him and saw understanding in his eyes. "Does it get lighter?" she asked. "No," he said honestly. "But you get stronger. You learn to carry it better. And you learn that the weight is proof that you care, that you're still human. The day it stops feeling heavy is the day you should worry." His words echoed what others had told her, but coming from her father, they carried special meaning. He had walked this path before her, had carried his own weights from his own service. She wasn't alone in this journey. When Sarah reported for advanced sniper training, she felt ready. Not because the past months had been easy, or because she had fully resolved all her internal conflicts. She felt ready because she understood herself better, knew her capabilities and limitations, and had developed a framework for making ethical decisions under pressure. The training was intense and demanding, pushing her physically and mentally. But Sarah discovered that she thrived under the challenge. She absorbed every lesson, practiced relentlessly, and approached each scenario with thoughtful consideration. Her instructors noticed her dedication and the maturity she brought to the training. During one exercise, her instructor pulled her aside. "Mitchell, you shoot like someone who understands what it means. A lot of students here are just focused on technical skills. You bring something more. Experience." Sarah nodded, accepting the observation without elaborating. She didn't talk much about the Ridge incident with other students. It was hers to carry, her story to process privately, but it informed everything she did, every decision she made in training scenarios. As the training progressed, Sarah began to see her future path more clearly. She would continue serving, continue developing her skills, continue taking on difficult responsibilities, but she would do it with eyes wide open, understanding both the necessity and the cost of what she did. She would be a soldier who never forgot the weight of her choices, who honored both the lives she saved and the lives she took by serving with integrity and moral courage. Years later, Sarah would look back on that deployment and the moment on the Ridge as a defining experience, not because it was her greatest achievement or her most dramatic moment, but because it was when she truly understood what service meant. It wasn't about glory or recognition. It was about being present when needed, making hard choices when required, and carrying the weight of those choices with grace and humility. She had been only backup on the Ridge, an afterthought in the mission planning, but when the moment came, she was exactly where she needed to be, with the skills and character necessary to do what needed to be done. That was the essence of service, Sarah realized. Being ready for the moment, even when you don't know when or how it will come, and having the strength to live with the consequences of doing what's right, even when it's hard. The girl from Oregon who loved climbing trees had become a soldier who could make an impossible shot under pressure. But more importantly, she had become a woman who understood that real strength wasn't just about physical capability or technical skill. It was about moral courage, about facing difficult truths, about maintaining humanity in inhuman situations. That was Sarah Mitchell's real achievement, and it would guide her through everything that came after.